Hey everybody, David Grant, corporate broker, real estate mentor, and coach. Now, in the previous video, we covered Contracts 1, which really gave you a good basis of what the essential terms of a contract are, how to negotiate that contract, understanding the terminology to not only be able to convey confidence and skill to your client, but also to protect yourself and your client from possibly any legal ramifications. Today, we're going to dig into Contracts 2. Just dig a little bit deeper, make sure we clarify some of the terminology for you. So let's get started. Contracts overview. Generally, everything in a contract, as we talked about earlier, is negotiable. Price, terms, timelines, who pays for what fees, so forth and so on. Another important thing is you can't be whiting out any terms within that contract. Whiting out, crossing out, things of that nature. Anything that is not acceptable in a contract needs to be addressed in a counteroffer. Reason being is, if there should ever be any type of legal recourse or legal action that came out of that contract, the contract actually can be used evidentiary as evidence in that hearing. So we don't want to make any changes to it other than addressing those on a counteroffer. No changes that I just talked about can be made by an agent. So if I'm representing a buyer or a seller, I can't make any changes to that contract. That contract actually has to be signed, dated by both parties to make it a part of that original purchase agreement, if you will. All offers must be presented to the seller. Now, sometimes you're going to get where maybe it's a multiple offer situation and our offer didn't get accepted. How are we ensured that our offer was actually presented to that seller? One of the things that we try to make sure happens is, hey, Mr. Jones, your offer wasn't accepted. However, here's the rejection from the seller. So we always want to try to make sure that we get the written rejection from that seller. Earnest money. Now we talked about the earnest money. Basically, the earnest money is a good faith gesture on behalf of the buyer to say that, here, I want to buy your property. Earnest money doesn't take place until after we have an agreement, and then that earnest money will be deposited on behalf of the buyer, not in addition to funds needed, but accumulative towards the total amount needed to close escrow. Again, earnest money basics. Should be adequate of the sales price. Generally speaking, depending on what's customary in your marketplace, should be about 1 to 1.5% of the purchase price. So if I have a $300,000 home, it's probably going to be somewhere around $3,000 to $3,500. Again, it shows good faith that I want to move forward in purchasing your home. Make sure a couple of loan programs actually can dictate the amount of the earnest money. So if I have a buyer who is financing with a very low minimum down payment, that earnest money actually might be a little bit less than that 1% rule. Again, whatever's going to be customary for your area will kind of dictate what happens in that process. Earnest money basics. There is no law that governs earnest money that says it has to be this amount. As we discussed earlier, there is negotiations. A lot of times maybe a seller is asking for a $5,000 earnest money and the buyer wants to put down $3,000. Again, those are negotiated. However, once we do have an accepted contract, generally what takes place is that earnest money deposit is deposited to the escrow holder, or again, whatever's customary in your location, on behalf of that buyer. Back in the old days, if you will, I'm kind of dating myself, I've been doing this for 20 years, we would actually take a handwritten check, deposit that check into escrow. However, with the rise of fraud, it was very easy to create fraudulent checks. And since there was a lag time between when the check was deposited to escrow and the check cleared the account, there was not necessarily time to know that that was a fraudulent check. So today, more customary, you'll see a direct wire deposit from the buyer's account to the title escrow company with verified wiring instructions in a secure email. I can caution you this. Make sure the email that comes from the title company is verified, because we don't want to be wiring to a fraudulent account. Name, lot size, square footage, personal property. All items we talked about in the purchase agreement, we've got to make sure that those are itemized in there. Number one, legal names of the buyer and seller. Generally speaking, photo ID, state driver's license, passport, military ID, something of that will suffice to do the transaction. Most title companies will do a background check to verify if there's any AKA, or also known as, out there. Those are the type of things that you're going to make sure that your buyer and seller has in that process. Purchase contract for the subject property. We have a commonly known address, 123 Banana Street, or we also have the APN that we talked about, which is the assessor's parcel number. That actually is the legal term that is going to be recorded at the county or the city, again, depending on what is customary in your area. One of the other things that we have to make sure that we talk about is you'll see on a legal description, in addition to the parcel number, we're going to have, the home is located on lot 2 of block 5 of subdivision ABC. That is just another additional term. Along with that, we're going to have square footage of the home, square footage of the lot, bedroom count, bathroom count, garage, single car, 2-car, 3-car, etc. And are there any other features on the property? Most commonly, that would be possibly a swimming pool. Those are all going to be things that we want to make sure that we include in that purchase contract. Additionally, if there's any personal property that the buyer would like to see conveyed, like I said before, I really like that chandelier. I want this dishwasher. We need to make sure we itemize that in the contract so that it's crystal clear and there's no controversy, if you will. Date of acceptance. Well, two things you understand here. Number one, there's a date when we write the contract. Number two, there's a date when the contract is accepted. Anything that takes prior to the accepted date generally can be in negotiation stages. We wrote the offer on February 20th, counteroffer 1, counteroffer 2. By February 23rd, we have a deal. That is the date that we have an executed contract. We must have signatures by both parties, date and time to make it valid. Closing and possession. A couple things we want to talk about. So we've had our contract. We went through the escrow period. Now we're coming up to closing. Buyer's going to have documents they're signing, whether it's a cash transaction or a loan. And the seller's going to have documents they're going to sign to convey that property. Property taxes, HOAs, trash, sewer, things that need to be prorated to the close of escrow. So the example on that was, if we close escrow on the 15th of the month, the seller's liable for those fees up to the 14th. The new buyer will take possession and be liable for those fees from the 15th moving forward. Those will all be itemized on the final settlement statement so you know exactly what you're paying. Once the buyer's loan has been fully approved, buyer has signed all their loan documents, seller has signed all of their conveyance documents, the lender doing the loan for the buyer will review all of those documents for accuracy for signatures, rates, and terms. Once they've reviewed that, they will actually wire those closing funds to the title and escrow company. So now we have buyer signatures on all docs, seller signatures on all documents, wired funds in from the loan, or if there's no loan, wired funds in from the buyer. When all of those have met, now we can send it up, record the documents, and now you have yourself a home. Closing process. Now I'm going to be a little redundant, but very important. Review the steps of the closing process. We just kind of talked about that. But more importantly, what we want to talk about, we'll go back to the final walkthrough, right? Why do we do the final walkthrough? Generally speaking, there's no set time frame for that, but normally maybe 3 days before close of escrow. We're walking the property to ensure that the property is in the same condition that it was in when we offered to buy it. Secondly, were there any repairs negotiated between the buyer and seller that we need to double check to make sure that those have been completed. The buyer and seller sign all documents that we talked about in the previous slide. Everything's in place. Lender, before the buyer, sends funds to close, or the buyer sends funds to close. The escrow sends all the documents to record with the county. The keys are given to the buyer at closing. One thing to keep in mind, if there is a loan involved, generally speaking, from the day you sign your documents to the day you get your keys is about a 24-hour timeline. There's wires, everything are based on East Coast time. So out here in the West Coast, our cutoff time is 2 p.m., which is 5 p.m. Eastern time. But once that wire is received, once the documents are recorded, both agents are notified. Now you can meet your buyer, give them those keys.